monsters.
In 1127 AD, a Crusader knight was buried in England with a mysterious red object in his tomb. Now in the present day, as the construction of a new underground transit system is underway, an underground cemetery is discovered, containing the tombs of many Crusader knights. Part of this cemetery is even underwater. Experts believe these knights attacked Egypt on their way back to England. Dr. Henry Jackal arrives on the scene, taking over the operation. It's revealed that this archaeological discovery holds the secret he has long been obsessed with, the secret of Princess Amenet. Princess Amenet, the daughter of a pharaoh in ancient Egypt. She was beautiful, fierce, and ruthless. She was set to inherit the kingdom from her father, to be worshipped like a god. But before that could happen, the pharaoh had a son. Everything changed. Amenet felt betrayed, and to seek vengeance, she made a dark pact with Set, the god of death. Set would grant her the power to kill her family and exact her revenge. But in return, she would help unleash Set upon the world, inhabiting the body of a mortal man. Together, they would bring ruin to the world. However, before Amenet could fulfill her part of the pact, she was captured by Egyptian priests and mummified alive for her sins. The priests buried her far from Egypt, sealing her darkness away. In present-day Iraq, U.S. Army Sergeant Nick Morton and Corporal Chris Vale are setting out to explore what they believe is the site where Amenet was buried, and Dr. Henry is paying them handsomely for this off-the-books task. The site is swarming with insurgent soldiers, making Chris hesitate, but Nick insists, forcing him to join. Suddenly, they get caught in heavy fire. With no other option, they call in an airstrike to force the insurgents to scatter. The airstrike hits, uncovering the tomb of Amenet. Nick stumbles, almost falling straight into it. Suddenly, Colonel Greenway arrives, surveying the chaotic scene. He glares at Nick and Chris, suspicious. What were you two thinking? Using army privileges to conduct private business? Stealing antiquities to sell on the black market? Nick and Chris deny it, claiming they had reason to believe insurgents were threatening nearby villagers. Just then, an army-employed archaeologist, Jenny, strides in and slaps Nick across the face. She says she slept with him a few nights ago in Baghdad, only to have him steal a map from her afterward. But her anger shifts to shock as she notices the gaping hole in the ground. The tomb looks Egyptian. She stares, baffled, because they're standing on Persian land. Turning to Greenway, she explains, "This is my job, Colonel. I'm here to secure precious artifacts that could be worth billions. I'm going down there." Greenway scowls but orders Nick and Chris to join her. With Greenway's warning ringing in their ears, Nick, Chris, and Jenny descend into the tomb. Inside, Nick notices something strange, mercury dripping from the ceiling. Jenny explains that the Egyptians believed mercury kept evil spirits at bay. They follow a canal of mercury, which leads them to a second chamber. As Jenny inspects the area, Chris starts pocketing jewelry from the ancient skeletons, but Jenny's expression turns from curiosity to dread. She notices that the statues are facing the pool of mercury, not away from it. There are no signs of preparation for the afterlife here. She realizes, this isn't a tomb, it's a prison. She looks at the chains dipping into the mercury and says, these aren't here to pull anyone out, they're meant to hold someone down. Suddenly, Greenway's voice crackles over the radio, "We have to get you out of there. Insurgents have been spotted approaching." But Jenny, her eyes fixed on the mercury, declares, "I'm not leaving, not until I see what's down there." While Chris and Jenny argue, Nick examines the pulleys holding something down. Suddenly, he gets an idea. He shoots the system, and a sarcophagus rises up out of the ground. But then, spiders! They start crawling out from every direction, swarming the cave. Chris yelps as one bites him and, frustrated, begins shooting wildly at them. Nick grabs him, urging, "Stay calm, they're not poisonous." Nick glances at the sarcophagus and is suddenly overwhelmed by a vision. He sees Amenet, a haunting figure, approaching him. She whispers, "You have set me free, you are my chosen." Just as quickly, he's snapped back to reality by Jenny's voice, saying, "We need to take this tomb with us." Shaken, he relays her message to Greenway, who arranges a helicopter. As they airlift the sarcophagus, Nick notices crows circling and following it through the sky. Eventually, they arrive at an airstrip, just as a sandstorm brews on the horizon. They load the sarcophagus onto a plane and board, heading home. Inside, Chris's condition starts to worsen, but no one seems to notice. Nick tries to reconnect with Jenny, admitting, "I know I took your map, but my feelings for you are real." Jenny doesn't reciprocate, reminding him that his disregard for artifacts is an insult to her life's work. Meanwhile, she reads the sarcophagus inscriptions, learning Amenet's dark story. Suddenly, Nick's vision returns. He sees Amunet using him to bring Set into the world. Out of nowhere, Chris gets up, his eyes empty, and starts trying to pry open the sarcophagus with a knife. Greenway stops him, but Chris, in a mindless rage, stabs him. He then lunges at Nick, knife in hand. Nick has no choice but to shoot him. Just then, thousands of crows appear out of nowhere, crashing into the plane, shattering windows, ripping through the engines. The plane goes into a nosedive, spiraling toward England. In the chaos, Nick manages to strap a parachute on Jenny and pushes her out of the plane, saving her life. Nick crashes to his death, along with all the other soldiers on the plane. Afterward, a traumatized Jenny is called in to identify the bodies of the crash victims. Meanwhile, in the morgue, Nick suddenly wakes up inside a body bag. Confused and panicked, he wriggles free, only to turn around and see Chris. Shocked, he demands, "Chris, what's going on?" Chris just looks at him knowingly and says, "You already know." At that moment, Jenny arrives with the doctors, her eyes widening as she sees Nick alive. But then it's revealed only Nick can see Chris. Elsewhere, two officers arrive at the crash site. One of them discovers the sarcophagus and, with morbid curiosity, opens it. Inside, he sees a mummy. He calls over his partner, but suddenly, the mummy comes to life. She lunges at him, sucking the life out of him, and as she drains his energy, her own form becomes stronger, more alive. She does the same to his partner, and then it's revealed. When she drains someone's life, their bodies become her slaves. Later, Nick and Jenny meet at a dimly lit bar, still trying to wrap their heads around the fact that Nick survived the crash. Jenny can't explain it, but she has a theory. She tells Nick there was once an Egyptian princess who was erased from history. I think Amenet was that princess. She explains that Amenet used a special dagger with a jewel on its hilt in her attempt to bring Set into the world. Archaeologists believe that the jewel was separated from the dagger and stolen by crusaders, who then buried it with one of their knights. She goes on, some new crusader tombs were recently discovered, and I think the jewel is in one of them. She looks at him with a mix of fear and realization. Nick, we may have awakened a great power here. As Jenny explains all of this, Nick can't focus because Chris is everywhere, watching him. Nick stumbles into the bathroom, glancing in the mirror, and sees Chris. But Chris's expression is dead serious. He tells Nick, we're both cursed by Amenet, and unless you do exactly what she wants, things are going to get much worse for both of us. Meanwhile, Jenny is on the phone with Henry, updating him on everything that's happened. Henry's voice is calm but urgent. Bring Nick to me, and don't tell him too much. Back outside, Nick walks into a shadowy alley, only for Amenet to appear. Thousands of mice swarm around her, crawling toward him, leaping to attack. But then he blinks. It's all a vision. He's actually standing in the middle of a busy road. Just then, Jenny pulls him back to safety. Breathless, he confides, "You're right, we've angered the gods." He tells her about his visions, but Jenny tries to reassure him, suggesting he might have mercury poisoning. Frustrated, he snaps, "Mercury poisoning? You were just talking about gods and curses?" He insists that he needs to see Amenet's sarcophagus. He has to see her skeleton to convince himself this is all just in his head. Meanwhile, Amenet has been draining the life from others, her body regaining form and power. Jenny and Nick arrive at the crash site, and Jenny heads straight for the sarcophagus. But Nick's attention is pulled toward a nearby church. He sees another vision of Amenet, and when he snaps back to reality, he's standing inside the church. Just then, Amenet's undead slaves surround him, restraining him as she appears, ready to perform the ritual to bring Set into the world. She breaks open a statue, revealing the dagger of Set. She raises it, poised to strike Nick, but stops, noticing that the jewel is missing from the hilt. Jenny bursts into the church, and Amenet turns on her. Nick fights off the mummies and manages to rescue Jenny. The two barely escape, sprinting out of the church and driving away. As they catch their breath, Jenny theorizes, "I think she's in your head, Nick. You keep ending up exactly where she is." Nick doesn't agree, but he realizes he's driven right back to the church without even noticing. Amenet really is in his head. In a panic, Nick and Jenny speed away, but bam, the mummies ambush them, forcing their vehicle to crash. Amenet strides in, subdues Nick effortlessly, and just as she's about to kill Jenny, a team of armed men with specialized weapons burst onto the scene, saving her. Nick wakes up disoriented in some unknown, eerie place. He meets Dr. Henry Jackal, who reveals he's the head of Prodigium, a secret society dedicated to neutralizing supernatural evil. Henry himself is infected with a dark condition, one he manages to keep at bay with a special serum. But wait, Jenny? She's been working for Prodigium this whole time. Henry shows Nick Amenet, captured, about to be injected with liquid mercury. because it'll freeze her, killing her completely. Amunet, staring at Nick, starts speaking to him, telling him that once Set possesses him, he'll become immortal, wielding power over life and death, with her by his side as his queen. As the mercury begins to burn her, Nick yells, begging Henry to stop, which Henry finds fascinating. Meanwhile, Henry's men find the jewel of the dagger. Amunet taunts Jenny, pointing out the dagger, the jewel, and Nick, her chosen, are all here together. Why does Jenny think that is? Jenny's horrified, realizing that Henry wants Set to possess Nick so he can be killed in human form. She confronts him, but he coldly explains that Nick is doomed anyway because he's cursed. Enraged, Nick snatches away Henry's serum, demanding a new plan, but Henry, without the serum, starts changing into his monstrous alter ego, Mr. Hyde. As Jenny and a guard dash out, the room seals shut, trapping Nick inside with Mr. Hyde. And at the same time, Amunet possesses a technician, making her escape imminent. After a fierce struggle, Nick finally manages to fend off Mr. Hyde, injecting him with the serum. Just as Hyde collapses, Jenny rushes in, breathless, and says, "We need to get to the Crusader Knight's tomb and destroy the jewel. Once that's done, the ritual can't happen and the curse will be over." As they dash toward the tomb, Amunet, enraged, summons all her powers, causing a massive sandstorm to engulf all of London. In the chaos, Nick and Jenny get separated, and suddenly, Chris appears. "Nick, over here, come on! I know where the stone is, but there's something off about him." And soon, it's revealed that Chris is lying. He's trying to lead them both straight to Amunet. Meanwhile, Amunet, relentless, uses her dark magic to enslave the corpses of the Crusader Knights, who begin delivering the jewel to her. In the London Underground, mummies, under Amunet's command, ambush Jenny, but Nick arrives just in time. They fight them off, but one mummy hurls them against a wall, sending them crashing into an underwater crypt. Nick desperately fights off the mummies, saving Jenny again, but just then, Amunet appears. Before he can react, she grabs Jenny and drags her underwater. Nick dives in after them, but he can't hold his breath long enough. Forced to resurface, he takes a desperate breath and plunges back down, dry, only to see Jenny's lifeless body lying in the murky depths. Heart-pounding, he races toward her, but more Crusader mummies block his path. He barely manages to outswim them, clutching Jenny's body and dragging her back to the surface. But it's too late, she's already gone. Amunet appears behind him, her voice soothing. "Forget her, Nick. Give in to me, to our love." But he won't look at her. Frustrated, she lashes out, punishing him. In the struggle, he seizes his chance, snatching the dagger from her grip. Just as he's about to destroy the stone, she sneers, "You know, if you let Set possess you, you'll have power over life and death." Nick freezes. This is his only chance to save Jenny. With a final, determined look, he stabs himself, allowing Set to take over his body. Set, now in control, gazes at Amunet with intense devotion, but then his eyes fall on Jenny's still form. The sight jolts Nick back to his senses. In a surge of power, Nick turns on Amunet, draining the life from her. Then, he leans down to Jenny, breathing that same life back into her. Jenny gasps as she blinks back to life, her eyes scanning the room wildly. "Nick," she calls, desperate, and spots him, hiding in the shadows. Heart-pounding, she approaches him, reaching out, but he pulls back sharply. Stay away, Jenny," he warns, voice breaking. "I don't know what I am anymore. And I can't risk hurting you. I love you, Jenny. I wish we had more time." With one last, lingering look, he turns and vanishes into the darkness, just as Henry and his men arrive. Later, as Jenny and Henry discuss Nick's fate, Henry sighs, "He's a monster now, Jenny. But the human part of him? That part will roam the earth, searching for a cure." Cut to Egypt. Nick stands on the edge of the desert, Chris by his side, brought back from death. The two mount their horses, Nick's gaze fixed on the pyramids in the distance. Behind them, a massive sandstorm roars, trailing Nick like a shadow, stirred by his power. His quest for redemption has begun. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to like our channel and subscribe. Let us know in the comments which movie you'd love us to recap next.